This is the Launch Station, the only place you need to look for all things onboarding, implementation, and customer success. Tune in for insights from industry experts every week.
Hey everyone, this is Sri. Welcome to a new episode of the Launch Station. Today we have with us a well-known customer success influencer and thought leader, Irit Eizips. Irit is the Chief Customer Officer and CEO of CSM Practice, which is one of the first customer success strategy consulting firms globally. Irit's expertise is in customer retention, upsell, and customer value strategies and methodologies. So for today, we're going to talk to her about creating wins with the first value delivery framework. Welcome to the show, Irit.
Thank you so much for having me, and hi everyone. Thanks for joining in.
Great. Let's start with a fun question. If you were to write an autobiography, what would its title be?
Yeah, lucky, because sometimes it's all about being in the right place at the right time and knowing the right people. And I think definitely large part of my success has been luck, knowing the right people, being in the cusp of, that milestone where the customer success methodology has started, and being at Gainsight, which is one of the leading customer success firms in the world that actually started the movement of customer success, and being part of that core team that did the market research and thinking around what would the methodology be. I think that's just being lucky sometimes. And so I think lucky is definitely the title of my biography.
That's a fun yet modest answer, Irit. Before we dive deep, what's one kind of impactful topic that's top of mind for you when it comes to customer onboarding?
Listen, I've been doing onboarding and implementations for many years. I would say that was one of the things that I started doing at the onset of my career. And I can say that a lot of times, the number one mistake that we do is we let the customer decide what the statement of work or the scope of work would be, and then drives towards that scope of work, thinking that when we have delivered on the scope, our work is complete.
Got it. And what are your lessons on this front?
Well, just because you delivered a system or you delivered to scope doesn't mean that the customer has had any value at that point. You might have been working with IT, or you might have been working with one of the champions of the project, but there might be a slew of end users that are actually supposed to be using the system. And so if at any point the way you designed the application or the software, you implemented things, you haven't really done all the work that needs to be done from change management standpoint, or you didn't really teach the customer how to deliver the first value to those end users, and they don't get it, they're not going to adopt. And I would also say that sometimes we let the customer decide what the scope is, and they choose something that's just too difficult for the end users to adopt. And so I think there's like I'm gonna say it again. I think that there's a way, no, I don't think, I know that there's a way that we can do this a lot better, that we can be thoughtful in the way we navigate the conversation around scope and become a trusted advisor to the customer in picking the correct scope, a scope that will help them be successful, not just in getting all the features and functions they want, but also in a way that we implemented maybe in like a multi-phased approach that will allow for change management, that will allow for the end users to easily consume the new process, the new technology.
So typically, how easy or hard are these conversations with an exec stakeholder on the customer side, especially when the customer has their own needs and perspective, and you as a solution provider have different suggestions on how to go about things?
You don't force anybody. I don't see why would that be an issue. I've been doing that for years. To effect, with my firm, I constantly produce statement of work and scope things out with the customer so I can navigate the conversation and say, I totally get that you want XYZ. Here's why I recommend against it. Here's why I recommend this other perspective. This is the thought track. This is why I think you're going to get more value faster. You have to make your case. You have to build your case, have reasonable conversations. At the end of the day, everybody's human. It's not their area of expertise to say, how should we implement this? At what cadence? They don't really know. They know their own world, but you come in all powerful. You might have had already hundreds of implementations, because that's what you do for a living. You implement your software, you implement your solution or your services. And so you are in a much better position to say, what have I seen worked? What did I not see work well? And help them avoid some risks.
Perfect. For many years, we've been talking about, time to go live, time to value, and then now we have this concept of time to first value. So how do you define first value and why is it critical?
Yeah, I love that you asked that. So first of all, I think companies in general fail to have a list of all the values that they actually bring to customers. You make a vote, like you do a survey of how many customers or customer success teams actually have a list of all the outcomes possible to be gained by customers. This is going to be very, very minimal. Now we have that sometimes on the sales side, sometimes marketing knows it, but actually mapping between the business outcomes, the value KPIs that the customer cares about, and the actual solutioning that we have to reach each goal. I can tell you that that exercise is so seldom being performed that I would encourage everyone that's listening to actually take that on as a challenge. So if you don't mind, I want to show the audience a few examples of how other companies are doing this and why this is so important. Here's a thought process, right? So first of all, you asked me, is this a hard conversation? The client knows that they don't know everything that they are supposed to know. So there are things that they know, which is about their business and what do they want to get at the end. But then there's things that they know that they don't know. For example, best practices, what works and what doesn't, what happened to other customers that took the same approach that they want to take. They don't know if what they want is actually risky or not. This is something that you can navigate. But that there's a whole section of things that clients don't even know that they don't know. So I want to explain. These are the things, the outcomes that you at your organization can help them achieve that they don't know even that you have the solution for. So for example, you might have a payroll system and they might be coming in just to do payroll, but lo and behold, you actually also have an onboarding module for their employees. They might not know that. And so if they don't know it and nobody makes them aware of it, they might actually purchase another tool to do just that. Or that might be like the most easiest thing that they can implement as firsthand, even though it's not their main reason why they are purchasing the application. But if it's easier to just get adoption going, you might be able to educate them on that. So in other words, what we're trying to encourage customer success, implementation, and onboarding teams is about being proactive so that not only we nail the onboarding experience, but we're becoming a trusted advisor much faster and helping customers maximize value in the long term, okay? So our goal is to sort of create a success plan at the onset, even during the sales cycle a little bit, when we're just talking about the scope, to say, okay, first of all, we need to plan the ideas and the outcomes that we think that we can improve upon over their life cycle with us. And so that helps increase the perceived value and get a better price point at the sales cycle, but then really help them decide on priorities. And I think this is where you and I need to kind of talk a little bit more. How do you do this appropriately? And what outcomes are actually relevant? Because there might be a lot of different outcomes that we can share. So if we are an HR application, for example, we might have a lot of different modules that we can tie into, and each one of them might have different business benefits that we can share with the client. But are they all the benefits and the outcomes that are relevant as a first value delivered? Some of these modules are highly complex. Some of these processes don't even exist if it's a smaller company. So which ones should the customer select? Can they select anything? They might say, you know what? We don't have employee career development. We're going to take a tool, yours, and this is the first module that we're going to implement. So they will need a new solution and new processes. Is this the right area to focus on? So that's something that during a discussion with a customer, as you navigate for the first value delivered, even if the scope of work does include all of these modules, you want to navigate the conversation around what should we be doing first and be that trusted advisor to the customer in navigating that decision appropriately so that we can nail a change management and get the adoption. That's the worst case, right? It's called the big bang approach. That's probably one of the worst things that any company can navigate towards. Now, I'm not saying that the SOW should not include all the modules, but can we socialize a conversation with the decision makers to say, hey, Mr. Customer, what are we going to do as the first outcome delivered, or the first operational success, or the first value delivered? Sometimes it's not about selecting a specific module or a specific process. Sometimes it's about selecting a specific cohort of the business. So for example, if you're in a customer success application, we might say, well, let's focus first on the strategic customers. If I already have like, I don't know, 10,000 of them, and overall I have 50,000 customers, do I really want to have all of these, like a huge data set to clean up? And, it might take months to just make sure that the data that we have in the new system actually works. What if we just took a subset of that data, make sure that that works, almost like in a proof of concept, like a POC that we would do even during the onboarding and implementation phase? Get that work, get that first value quickly delivered, and then add additional layers and increase the scope to say other business areas, other regions, other sizes of customers or types of customers.
Got it. And we all know businesses have high expectations. So are you implying that we must go after low-hanging fruit early on? And if so, how do we sort of strike a balance and keep the interests of all parties in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So if we go back, I actually created sort of like a visual for everyone to see. So first of all, we want to have a list of all the operational successes or the business outcomes that might be applicable for any customer. And then you want to start dividing them by impact and level of effort to implement. Okay, so do we want to focus on the quick wins? Absolutely, but you can also focus on home runs. And that means either low or high impact, but low and quick effort. The question is, what is a low effort, right? So I'll get to that in a minute here, but anything that is required massive amount of effort. So it could be a large scope in terms of the transactions or the records we're going to set up in the application or bring into the application, or it could be just completely new processes that the team has never seen before. So then that really means like a big change in the organization, even if technically it's easy, might be a big change in the organization. So those would fall, if it's a high effort and the incremental value to what the executive is trying to achieve is low, it's kind of like a nice to have, something that you would do after the team has already gotten the big wins out of it. If it is a big win for the team, if you were to make this effort, something that you can start working on in parallel to some of the quick wins, but definitely consider it as an advanced operational success or an advanced outcome for the client. And I would not recommend that as a first value delivered, which is this here, okay? And so once you have a list of all the outcomes, the first operational success or first outcome delivered, you have to ask yourself, so out of that list, do I always start with the quick wins? What if I had a list of 10 quick wins that they can select from? Which ones should they, like each customer, pick? There might be some additional considerations from the customer standpoint. So then we go into additional thinking around, all right, for onboarding, how do we prioritize those outcomes? And so you want to think about large disruptive change versus small and incremental. You want to fall into the small incremental change for that initial first value delivered, because you at that point, you're trying to just basically get your solution to stick. So you're not trying to boil the ocean, just a small increase, just so that they can get used to the technology. And then in terms of what types of processes you saw, that could be like a plethora of processes you can attach yourself into potentially. You want to take a look and ask the client, when they ask you to do something, you want to ask them, is this an existing process or is this something you don't even have yet? See, the way that the human mind works as they try to adapt, attach themselves to a new application, if it's a new process, they need to get used to both the new technology and adjust the way they work with this new process. That's two things that they need to accommodate. When we pick existing simple processes, then it's a no big deal from like, I'm still doing the same thing, but now I'm doing it better. I have a technology to improve on how I'm doing things. So you want to pick actually not just existing processes, but ones that you think that if they moved it into the technology, they will actually, the end users will have a much better time. Like this would be something that without the technology would take them hours or would be just redundant or duplicative, and they're dying to get out of whatever it is that they do. So you want to really cherry pick a process that's like currently a nightmare that the employees really hate, or, it's really simple to just have a quick win with your technology. And it's not a big deal to implement so that you have low resistance to change and it's a low risk.
Awesome. And how do you think about subsequent outcomes post that first value delivery? Does your approach remain the same through the journey, or do you sort of amp it up post that first value being delivered?
You got it. And this is what these numbers represent in the graph. So after you got the end users to just get acclimated to the system, all right, they're having a good time, they got used to it, it's not so scary anymore. Now you can start moving into small incremental, higher, like, oh, okay, still not time consuming, not resource consuming, but you can get a higher value because it's a completely new process. So now you're adding new capabilities, and the team should be very excited about that because they already know the technology, but now they're going to have some additional functionality and things that they can do and insights that they can get. But they already had some successes, so they're not as resistant to change. And it's a lower risk. So usually if you start from that, that would be a high resistance. But once you broke through the understanding the technologies, they only need to learn one thing, that new process, because they already know your technology. So you move into this bracket, and then once you have enough value built out, the usage is in a cadence. Now you want to start moving into larger disruptive cadence of outcomes. And so essentially the conversation with customers, and I've done this 1,000 times before with customers when we were implementing technology in the past, kind of want to say, all right, what is the roadmap to implementing all the features? Can we create sort of like a Gantt chart for those of you who are familiar with that concept, sort of like a timeline? What are we going to do first? What are we going to do second? What can be expected in terms of change management quarter over quarter? And then in your head, just think about existing versus new, small incrementals versus large disruptive. Maybe run these ones in parallel to weaving in some of the quick wins. Think about it kind of like when it's similar to how, product management teams build product roadmaps. It's very similar. They have like the small stones and the big rocks. So you don't neglect the big rocks. You kind of like work on them in parallel to weaving in some quick wins.
Got it. And I'm guessing the ROI as well gets sort of staggered in a way in which like you see the smaller ROI, but you're going to promise the larger ROI with time and sort of showcase how that's going to go hand in hand with these disruptive changes.
What's funny is that, let's say you just built towards the larger ROI and they had to wait for 2 years before they've seen it. People get tired. They get tired and they don't want to invest as much resources and energy unless you get them those quick wins in between. So it actually serves towards that larger ROI to get people motivated to invest even more. Furthermore, look, there's this concept of moments of value and customer value stories that we try to always promote within the customer success management. And it's definitely something that I would encourage doing during onboarding, especially if it has this multi-phased approach for these larger enterprise software companies, which is, anytime you get an incremental value delivered, you want to have thoughtful change management so that the end users actually adopt it, but then also have a formal process where you define or sort of like articulate to the customer what you think the business value was, and then have a conversation with the customer to validate that your thinking is correct, have it documented as a moment of value, put it in your system, share it with your customer so that they can share it up with management to say, hey, this is the value that we've delivered so far. If you can even quantify it, that's great. If not, at least have a qualitative quote from your client say, yeah, this is what we've actually seen. This is how this process has been improved. This is great, like having this new process in. Just have any kind of quotes. When you get to the renewal date, if you can have more than one moment of value documented in that first year, you're in a really good shape, even if you haven't really delivered that ultimate ROI, because people renew based on perceived value, not necessarily the value realized.
Okay. Another issue with a lot of implementation projects is, as customers define their goals and needs, we don't necessarily know where things are before we start implementing our solution. We don't have a clear picture of the before state of things. So is this something you try to do with your clients where, you document the baseline or before state before implementing any changes?
I think that's really interesting question. And we do that a lot by defining the success indicators for any initiative that we're about to implement with customers. I think it's important to have that conversation before you start putting any resources in changing anything. And there's two types of baseline data that you can collect. First of all, what are the challenges that is a qualitative challenge that you can capture, like the business challenges, the stuff that people say. And then you can say, all right, if you want me to improve productivity, how long does it take on average to do a certain process? Can we interview a few people to kind of say, roughly this takes 2 hours or this takes 20 hours a quarter or whatnot, so that you can benchmark after you implemented your process to say, what was the improvement? Is it actually being improved? And if not, you can at least double click and say, are they adopting? Are they using it correctly? How can I tweak that? Otherwise, you're really in a dark, you can't really prove the value. You don't even know. But between stories and actual data, I think you're in a really good place.
That's very insightful, Irit. So how do you suggest communicating and setting the right expectations around the first value delivery?
I think you should definitely document it. So first of all, have a slide deck that has all your outcomes, similar to how I showed it before. And then highlight the ones you believe are appropriate for a first value delivered in general. And then out of that, have a conversation with a client. Ask them, which ones of these processes that we deem as best in class for first value delivered do you already have in place? Is this process a good one or bad one? Is this works well for you, or is this a real nightmare right now? Where can we get the quick wins? Like actually have that conversation with the client, and then have a list of all the things that they really want to do and put them as a high priority based on, whether it's a increment, what's the level of the incremental effort, as well as the impact, and whether the business process exists or not. And then literally documented in a timeline, like I suggested. I think that in and of itself not only allows you to communicate what have you agreed upon in terms of a phased approach, but will also leave them as a, something to take away as a long-term success plan, so that they always keep working with you on additional business outcomes that they would like to implement for their business.
That's a great answer, Irit. So the next question is about something most SaaS companies initially resist doing, but eventually seem to do: charging for onboarding services. So our products and solutions are purchased to deliver certain outcomes and results for the customer, right? And onboarding is needed for them to get that value. So what's your take on this? Should we charge or should we not charge for onboarding services?
I think you should be charging for customer onboarding. I think you should be charging for customer success, just like you could be charging for premium support. The only time you won't charge is when, the onboarding effort might be like a half hour because it's supposed to be self-served, or you might be a very small startup and you're still building the case for your business model. But if you've been in business, you already proven your business model, and onboarding a customer does take a lot of effort on your end, anywhere between 50 to 100 hours minimum, to, if it's just like a couple of hours on your end, then maybe not. But if it is a significant amount of hours, you could charge. I had a customer that every time somebody purchased a module that they could implement on their own, this was a large company, they offered a 4-hour workshop with one of their SMEs, subject matter experts, to just audit that process as they go along. So offer coaching, have the customer implement the module, and then have a review and an audit so that they make sure that they implemented it correctly. Most customers will find that very valuable. Even if they could do it on their own, there might be some fine tuning that they can gain insights from someone that has done that, like a solution architect of sorts. And you would be surprised how many customers would actually be willing to pay. I think it's just a matter of pricing it correctly based on, how much is the product actually costs, or the business value of having someone chaperone the process versus letting customers do it on their own.
That makes a lot of sense, Irit. We're now going to move to the next section of our podcast, which is our rapid fire section. Here's your first question, Irit. What is a book that you've read in the past that sort of really stayed with you?
Yeah, a while ago, probably 10 years ago or so, I used to work for this consulting firm, and my boss back then gave me this book, It's Your Ship. And I just found it extremely inspirational. It's management techniques from the best damn ship in the Navy. It's written by Captain Michael Abrashoff. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Mm-hmm. It's just an inspirational book. Anybody who is either managing teams, wants to own a business, wants to be a manager, I think should definitely read that. Very inspirational, lots of great tips. Just a wonderful story.
Awesome. Here's the next question. If you could learn one new professional skill and one new personal skill, what would they be?
So on the professional side, I would say I would love to become a better entrepreneur just in general. See, I've been a consultant my entire life. So I feel like I'm pretty good at, managing my projects and working with clients. But I feel that there's so many aspects to managing a business that sometimes it just blows my mind. So I think like the whole process of sales and pricing, I don't know that would be my forte. So that would be a skill that I would love to continue to expand and learn, just so I can have a successful business. And then in terms of the personal skill set, for me, a lifelong learning is communication. It's just at the heart of everything that we do. And so I think that, when I was a little girl, maybe I was like a little bit more aggressive, and, as I was growing up, I might not have fine-tuned all my skills. And I think that now as an adult, I'm just becoming more mellow, more patient. And that's the ultimate goal. Can you stay calm while the storm blows? Can you stay in the eye of the storm, as they call it, and always keep your chill, keep your cool, see what is really going on? That's really the goal, and being able to communicate effectively with humans.
Great answer, Irit. Moving to the last part of the show, and I'll be asking questions from Pre-Flight, which is our Slack community for customer onboarding, and also from our audience on Twitter and LinkedIn. So here's the first one. What's the typical time to value that you see for modern SaaS companies today?
Um, it depends on the complexity of the solution. So if it's supposed to be self-serve, it should be within, a few days, sometimes at the most 10 days. And that's why most trials end within 10 to 14 days. If it's a little bit more complex, but not hugely complex, then most companies would try to do it within 8 weeks. That's the ballpark of SaaS companies that are enterprise, even enterprise solutions would aim for the first value delivered to be in 8 weeks, even though to implement the entire scope and range of functions and modules would take a year or two. They would try to find happy mediums to have enough outcome selection so that you could finish the whole thing in 8 weeks. But sometimes some companies have a solution and the bulk of the money or the bulk of the revenues is actually coming from services allowing you to customize. So think about white label type of products where you're going to highly customize the application or the solution for your business needs. This might take years. So in those cases, we often see annual contracts for 3 years and 7 years before the renewal hits, because the implementation is just, and the customization needed it takes so long.
Okay, that's fair. Moving to the next, who should be in charge of defining metrics for the first value delivery?
I think that's an area that customer success can definitely help. But like I said, if it's a mature company, marketing or sales might have already figured it out. So if your company exercises value-based selling as a methodology, they might have already figured out the value categories or the value outcomes that are relevant for their customers, or even the value KPIs. Worthwhile asking before you go into and venturing into an exercise within customer success.
Irit, how does your first value delivery change across tiers and segments of customers based on maturity levels?
Love that. I'd actually definitely recommend. So if you have different industries that you work with, do have a selection of outcomes that's relevant by industry or even customer size. That's not uncommon to see a outcome slide that is tailored for a specific customer segment or cohort. In terms of maturity, of course, if you have someone on your team that can help you build a maturity model, you can actually assess the maturity of the customer and say, okay, you're in level 2, and then say that the phased approach would be just moving them from one level to the next. Nobody expects to go from level 2 to level 5 if that's the maximum level. It's unreasonable. So usually most companies say, well, it's reasonable for us to move from level 2 to level 3. What would that take? And that also helps compartmentalize the discussion around scope.
Got it. Here's the next question. Who are the stakeholders who must be informed and involved during the first value delivery?
So on our front, the vendor, we should have the customer success manager or the AE lead the conversation. It depends on who is going to be from the customer side. So the higher the executive, you may want to even have an executive on your end to attend the conversation, because they can build rapport and trusted advisor. So let's say you have a marketing solution, okay? You want the CMO to be in the room when they think about first outcome delivered. And if that's the case, your CMO might be also invited, and they can actually share how they're using the solution in your own company. So like, how do you consume your own solution in the marketing department? And they can tell the best story at that point and help them socialize the conversation around what to focus on. If that's not possible, then you definitely want to have the executive decision maker, the business lead, the business champions, maybe one representative as from the employee standpoint, or like a tactical in IT if you need to, so that they can have the perspective of, are we selecting the right thing? They can share, is this process hard or easy? They can share whether from a technical standpoint, there would be any hardship to select that as a first value focus.
Got it. What's your advice for a CSM to handle post-handoff conversations? Like as you're getting out of onboarding, the customers tend to have these technical discussions on like feature misses and bugs. How do you steer the conversation back to strategic discussions?
I don't think you should steer it back. I think it has its own place. I think if you want to steer it out of that conversation, you should have in advance meetings that are designed to talk about feature misses or any kind of technical issues they're currently experiencing, and have a different audience in those conversations versus the ones where you have the executive coming into the room. So you kind of want to clear those out and have those meetings preliminary to a meeting where you have the executive and the opportunity to talk about strategic advancement. Sometimes the executive will start bringing those up. And so in that case, you have to handle those as best you can, and try to have an agenda, a clear agenda, and enough time. If you know that the customer has a lot of issues and features that are missing, then bake some time for that.
That's very useful advice, Irit. For high growth companies that are hiring a lot of CSMs, how can we ensure that the QBRs done by our new folks are of high quality?
Okay. First of all, have a template, have a clear process, have a talk track. For those of you who don't know what the talk track is, could be like a list of questions, possible answers. If the answers are out of left field, how to react, what would be follow-up questions that they should be asking. In other words, you want to formalize the process as best you can, and then give them some coaching. So maybe the first few that they lead, they will, first of all, maybe they chaperone more experienced CSMs, and then the few ones that they lead, have someone senior accompany them so that they, give them some feedback post QBR so that they can learn and adjust according to best practices.
And we are at the end of the questions from the community. So our final question for the day, Irit, what advice would you give a new leader in charge of customer onboarding?
I would say, first of all, nail the onboarding experience. Make sure you understand what's the onboarding experience right now. Where are the pitfalls from a customer standpoint? Where do we fail in that experience? What works, what doesn't? Interview some customers to see exactly from their vernaculars, what would they like to see more? Sometimes they can even share what works for them as they work with other vendors, and that would give you a sense of what are they expecting. I would also recommend, so that once you fix your processes and add more templates, to also consider having a onboarding health score and share that with other teams. So that when you have a handoff from onboarding to support, customer success, then they can better understand what happened. Lastly, I would say invest in a tool, be more transparent about what is happening during onboarding, what phase is the customer within the implementation or onboarding process. A lot of times we know that there's an issue there. A lot of onboarding teams are still using Excel spreadsheets and presentations to keep track of status. And unfortunately, that's not scalable. It's really hard for CSMs to understand what's going on with that account. And they might get a customer that is at high risk right after onboarding, we're completely blindsided. So we kind of want to break down the silos between onboarding and adoption. And so having these health scores and a more open customer onboarding data definitely could help the company scale and achieve more success with their customers.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, Irit. It was great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.
And folks, thanks for tuning in. If you missed our previous episodes, you can subscribe to our podcast and go back and listen to them. And do join Pre-Flight, our community for implementation and onboarding, for exclusive content and events from us. Thank you.